I don't know. Do I have to watch the Ken Burns documentary about the American Revolution? Can't I just tell people I did? This is the mop-up. Whether you like it or not, the 2026 midterms have begun. The Epstein files, not about the victims, only about the midterms. The shutdown, not about Obamacare subsidies expiring at the end of the year. It was only about the midterms. The big debate in December to renew those Obamacare subsidies, that will not be about helping Americans whose health care costs are about to double, possibly triple. It's about helping members of the House and Senate running for re-election. It's about carving out a winning position that plays well with voters. 2025 is over. Trump was sworn in, and from that point until Election Day, November 4th, the battle in Washington was between each party trying to pass or block legislation that pleased the donor class. There are seasons to all this. 2025 was about the donors. 2026 is about the voters. Every 2 years, we hold national elections. The year after an election, like 2025, that's when both parties only, and I do mean only, please their donors. The year of an election, like 2026, that's when both parties pivot to please their voters. That is the playing field Citizens United created. And until we get money out of politics, that's how it's going to stay. 1 year for the donor class, 1 year for the voters. Everything we saw this year, one big beautiful bill, the airstrikes in Iran, the airstrikes in the Caribbean, the rounding up of immigrants, Democrats fighting one big beautiful bill, challenging the airstrikes, challenging the treatment of immigrants. All of that was financial, not political. It was financial posturing. Both parties were catering and cratering to their donors, fully aware they would have to answer to their voters in 2026. After Election Day, November 4th of this year, both parties pivoted. They now have less than 1 year to convince voters that everything they just did for the donor class was actually done for you and me, the voter. As I said, whether you want it or not, the midterms have begun. We transition now from follow the money to follow the votes. Politicians, including Trump, are watching polls, terrified of the American people because now it's our turn. And the stakes couldn't be higher going into 2026. For our nation and Donald Trump, this will be a zero-sum game. Either Trump wins the 2026 midterms or America does. Should Republicans maintain the House of Representatives, defying history and no doubt the law, Trump will treat that as an overwhelming mandate for a third term, even if Republicans keep control of the House by just one seat. A win is a win. If after the midterms, we still have what is called unified government, where Republicans control the White House and Congress, he ain't leaving. I don't care about the Constitution because Trump doesn't care about the Constitution. The Constitution says he should be in prison already. So forget the Constitution. And I don't care about the 22nd Amendment because he doesn't. We saw how he behaved on January 6th, but this time around, he's completely surrounded by enablers. There's no chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, no defense secretary, no attorney general this time to rein Trump in like they did on January 6th. You saw what Marjorie Taylor Greene said over the weekend. After she stood up to Trump over the Epstein files and Obamacare subsidies, she lost count of the death threats. Now she needs private security. The temporary funding bill that Trump signed last week includes $203 million on enhanced security for members of Congress. That's because of what Trump considers the power of persuasion. Congress has to spend more on security because that's how Trump persuades them with death threats. He first plays nice. He'll pick up a phone, make a call. He'll make several calls. And when that doesn't work, more calls start coming in, but they're not from Trump. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who walks the earth armed to her capped teeth, she's openly admitting right now she's terrified. Trump has no options other than staying, either in the White House or in power. He cannot become a private citizen. He's made way too many enemies again, and while I don't think prison awaits him should a new Democratic president get sworn in, I do think the remainder of Trump's pathetic life will be taken up by nonstop litigation that, without the power of the White House, without the power of the Republican Party, which secretly wants to turn the page on him, he will, without all that, he'll be living in a state of siege. Perhaps less menacing than his 4 wilderness years during the Biden administration, but it's going to be bad if he vacates the White House. I don't know. I don't know how this plays out. Maybe J.D. Vance will run for president on a promise that Trump would get elected speaker should Republicans win control of the House. That would be perfectly legal. Speakers can be anybody. Mike Johnson proved that. The party in control of the House of Representatives can elect whoever they want to be speaker. You don't have to be a member of Congress. Maybe that will be Trump's constitutional gambit to stay in power. But there are a lot of variables with that. I doubt it. Besides, he wouldn't enjoy the job. It's way too much responsibility. It's not ceremonial, but it could be. More likely, Trump will create an emergency where one doesn't exist to justify something unimaginable. I don't know. An emergency to what? Postpone the elections? Cancel the elections? Impossible, you say? How many emergencies has he declared this year alone? What is it, 8, 9, 10? 10 non-existent emergencies? All I know is it's essential for Trump to win next year's midterms because his presidency cannot withstand the scrutiny of congressional oversight. And more importantly, if Democrats do flip the House, maybe the Senate, Trump will be perceived as an albatross around the Republican Party's neck. It will no longer seem politically expedient to find some sort of 22nd Amendment workaround so Trump could run again in 2028. He will become increasingly isolated, one would think. Defeat in 2026 could create a snowball effect where congressional oversight from Democrats becomes death by 1,000 cuts as the entire country, including the Republican Party, no longer even consider the possibility of another 4 years of Donald Trump. Now, we know if Democrats win control of the House, he will be impeached at least once, but who knows? Maybe another impeachment or two, and that would die in the Senate. Maybe a couple of impeachments would help him politically. Those trials last year helped him. 2029, when a new president is supposed to be sworn in, not that far away. And Trump will be in his early 80s. He knows when he leaves office, or if he leaves office, it starts all over again, especially with a Democrat in the White House. One of the things that saved Trump during the Biden administration, besides Attorney General Merrick Garland waiting 2.5 years after January 6 to indict Trump over January 6, one of the things that helped and saved Trump was he loomed over the Biden administration. He was running for re-election. It was still his Republican Party. But if he can't run again, and he's no longer president and a private citizen in 2029, short of making him speaker in a Republican-controlled House, he will have zero political clout as members of his own party summon the spine to look for new leadership, which, because of human nature, ambition, they secretly crave a new leader. The problem for supplicants in an authoritarian regime like the Republican Party, the problem with that is there's no room for upward mobility, which Republicans don't mind taking away from us, just not themselves. They want their upward mobility. There's no room for advancement in the Republican Party without debasing yourself before Donald Trump. They don't want that. They want him to go away. They won't admit it, but they secretly want Trump to go away. What then if he goes away? Well, if Trump's lucky, he's looking at Rudy Giuliani's life. Trump can pardon himself, I think. It's never been done before. He can pardon his cronies, but those pardons don't safeguard against state and local indictments. I've always said that last year's Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity was far more portentous for Trump than people admitted, especially when and if he's no longer president. There was way too much hyperbole after that immunity decision, where people who have it in for the Roberts Court claimed that he and the 6-3 majority handed the president blanket immunity to do whatever it is he wanted. It's not true. Far from true. Had Trump lost last year, special counsel Jack Smith's office, that would still be open. And in August of 2024, Smith convinced a grand jury to deliver up brand new superseding indictments against Trump that many believe complied with the Supreme Court's ruling on what crimes an ex-president would not enjoy immunity from, not enjoy immunity from prosecution. Those superseding indictments especially and specifically charged Trump with crimes he committed not as president, but as a candidate for political office. So had Harris won, Trump would have been convicted already in compliance with the Supreme Court's immunity ruling last year. By the way, should Trump leave office in 2029, there's nothing to stop an attorney general serving a Democratic president from jumpstarting all those federal cases against Trump that Jack Smith started, statutes of limitations notwithstanding, but there are workarounds to the statutes of limitations. I doubt that would happen, but there are going to be some new indictments. There are new crimes because Trump keeps making new enemies and keeps violating old laws. What a new Democratic president might do is offer up a blanket pardon for Trump and then let the state of New York's criminal courts have at him. Let Congress have at him. But a new Democratic president might want to rise above it all and say it's time for healing, but the states and Congress would go after Trump. Prison for him? Never. A legal morass extending well into his 90s? Conceivable, which is why he cannot leave the Oval Office, which is why he must win the midterms. Either way, 2029, when Trump is supposed to vacate the White House, either way, it's going to be a nightmare for him and America. It's going to be a nightmare either way. Donald Trump is like a turd that refuses to be flushed. He isn't doing anything conciliatory right now to make his post-presidency life any easier, especially with Democrats in charge of the Justice Department. As I said, new enemies, new crimes, crimes that clearly don't fall under the penumbra of official acts as president. Hosting events at the White House for people who purchased your meme coin is not a constitutionally prescribed role outlined in Article 2. These are crimes. So it all comes down to the midterms. And next year's midterms will be a game of inches. In fact, There could even be a blue wave where more Americans vote for Democratic members of the House of Representatives than they vote for Republicans, but Republicans still keep the House. This is conceivable because you win the House of Representatives congressional district by congressional district. It's happened before. 2012, Republicans kept control of the House despite the combined votes for all Democratic congressional candidates being 1.4 million larger than Republicans. In other words, Republican candidates for Congress lost the popular vote, but won the House of Representatives because just like the presidency, you don't win control of the House according to popular vote. You win it state by state, congressional district by congressional district. And something similar happened in 1996 when Republicans kept the House, despite Democratic congressional candidates winning a slightly higher margin of overall votes. This is what gerrymandering can do. But in 2012, you had Obama running for re-election, and in 1996, you had Clinton running for re-election. These were two very popular presidents. They both chalked up substantial wins in reliably blue congressional districts, which translated into Democratic congressional candidates in those districts overperforming. The turnout was bigger for Democratic candidates in Democratic districts. That's why they won the popular vote. But Republicans kept the House because congressional districts are allocated by population, not voter turnout. Obama and Clinton were reelected, but subjected to divided government, which is what Americans favor. Historically, the odds of Republicans keeping the House 2 years into a president from the same party are infinitesimal. I consider the modern era of American politics starting in 1994 when Newt Gingrich became the first Republican Speaker of the House in 40 years, which meant Nixon and Reagan, Republicans, won re-elections with massive landslides, massive. Nixon in 72, Reagan in 84, massive landslides, but they still had to contend with divided government. They never had a Republican-controlled House of Representatives, even when they were first elected to office. Eisenhower was swept into office in 1952, and with that victory, Republicans also took the House and Senate. For 2 years, Eisenhower enjoyed undivided government, but come the midterms of 1954, Democrats took back control of the House. That is the norm, divided government. We want it, especially after the first 2 years of a new president. So while Eisenhower, Clinton, Obama, Trump the first time, and Biden all came into office with a unified government, their party controlled the Oval Office and Congress, it was only for 2 years. Come midterms, their party either lost control of the House, the Senate, or both. What I'm telling you is history is not on Mike Johnson's side if Trump were a normal president. If Trump were a normal president, there would be no way Republicans keep the House next year. Biden's midterms in 2022 were remarkable. He kept the Senate, and he almost kept the House. Everyone thought a massive red wave was materializing, but Republicans only won back the House in 2022 by flipping just 9 seats. They ended up with 222 seats, and after last year's election, they ended up with 220 seats. The trend lines, along with history and America's thirst for divided government, don't favor House Republicans next year. 3 seats, that's all Democrats need to flip the House, theoretically. But Donald Trump isn't normal, and he's what they call in politics a grinder. Despite being a slob psychologically, he enjoys the requisite precision to grind out a win in this game of inches called politics. Because a win is a win. Winning a nail-biter is as good as a landslide. As I said, Democrats just need to flip 3 seats to gain control of the House, theoretically. It's why Texas redrew their maps to create 5 new, reliably red seats, theoretically. And why California responded this past election day by passing Prop 50, giving Gavin Newsom and his democratically controlled state house authority to cancel out Texas's 5 new reliably red seats with 5 new reliably blue seats, theoretically. Because the courts. Not so fast in Texas. There's been a massive ruling that got handed down on Tuesday from a panel of federal judges who ruled 2-1 on Tuesday. Was it Tuesday? I think it was Tuesday. Yes, it was Tuesday. I'm sorry. It was Tuesday. That they ruled on Tuesday that Texas's new map was unconstitutional and must revert back to the map drawn in 2021, right after the 2020 census. And the majority opinion was written by a Trump appointee. A Trump appointee wrote this decision. Now, Republicans will appeal, but it is believed they might not succeed. The next stop is the Supreme Court, which may or may not take the case. Now, gerrymandering is, according to the Supreme Court, okay if it's partisan, not okay if it's racial. So Texas right now is trying to convince the Supreme Court in their appeal that the 5 new congressional districts that they created were strictly for favoring Republican candidates. But there was a Department of Justice memo written that said dilute these 5 districts based on race. And if you dilute a district based on race, the Supreme Court said, we have to look at that map. We're going to take the case. If you can prove that the gerrymandering is only about one party trying to gain leverage over another, the Supreme Court says that's up to the state Supreme Court to decide. But if you're gerrymandering based on race, the Supreme Court takes the case. And this arms race of gerrymandering is continuing. Republican-controlled state legislatures in Missouri and North Carolina right now seem to have passed new maps, adding a total of 2 new Republican seats. Politico reports that Ohio was legally required to redraw its maps this year. And thanks to an 11th hour deal, Republicans agreed to make 2 reliably blue congressional seats slightly redder. This was a compromise. According to Politico, Democrats say those 2 seats are still competitive. They're only slightly redder. Josh Stein is the newly elected Democratic governor of North Carolina, but congressional maps, he's a Democrat, but congressional maps are drawn by the Republican-controlled state legislature. A legal argument will be made this new Republican district disenfranchises black voters, and so it might not hold up before the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court would have to take the case on the basis of it being racial gerrymandering. First up is North Carolina's state Supreme Court, and right now Republicans hold a 5-2 majority. Missouri's new red congressional seat is not set in stone. It also faces legal challenges because it is against Missouri's state constitution to redraw maps without a new census. The last census was 2020, every 10 years. That's in the Constitution. And according to Missouri's state constitution, no new congressional maps without a new census. This will be decided by Missouri's state Supreme Court, where Republicans hold a 5-2 majority. Gerrymandering, when it comes to the Supreme Court, has always been tricky and confusing. So in a 2019 ruling, the Supreme Court said it will not review any rewritten congressional maps drawn based on partisan gerrymandering. If a state legislature carves out new seats solely for the purpose of favoring one political party over another, the Supreme Court of the United States said that's constitutional, that's legal, and it's up to the state Supreme Court of the individual state to sort it out. But the court said if it can be shown that this new map has been drawn based on race, redrawn to dilute the voting power of a minority, then the court will review that map. Again, if it's an issue of partisan gerrymandering, one party trying to gain leverage over another, that's left to the state courts. If it's an issue of racial gerrymandering, one minority's representation being diluted on purpose, then the Supreme Court reviews the maps. That's partly because of a provision inside the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that encourages states, especially in the South, to draw congressional maps that include what are called majority-minority districts, where you have a majority-minority district is where a minority is the majority. And the Voting Rights Act of 1965 encourages states to draw maps that create majority-minority districts, giving voice to traditionally marginalized groups like blacks and Hispanics. So there's a tension here. There's a tension here between the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection under the law, this time for white people, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which encourages states to carve out congressional seats for concentrated populations for people of color. So that's the tension here. Last month, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a case challenging that provision of the Voting Rights Act that encourages states, especially in the South, to carve out majority-minority congressional districts. I know this is hard. It really is hard to get. I know. But this is what you are going to be hearing about from now until January 3rd, 2027, when the new Congress is sworn in. Okay. The state of Louisiana drew a map that created two heavily black congressional districts, resulting in two reliably blue congressional districts. That was in accordance with the provision inside the Voting Rights Act of 1965, urging states to go out of their way to make sure minorities, people of color, especially in the South, gained representation in the House of Representatives. Those who listened to oral arguments came away with the sense that the 6-3 majority sitting on the Supreme Court is prepared to sunset that provision inside the Voting Rights Act on the belief that it's outlived its purpose. The oral arguments seem to suggest that the Republicans on the Supreme Court, and there are 6, they seem to think this provision was necessary at one time, the provision that encourages states to carve out majority-minority congressional districts. They're saying it was necessary 60 years ago when America was still a racist nation. But the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was 60 years ago, and these Republicans believe we live in a much more tolerant post-racial society. Do you think that's true? That's what white Republicans want to believe. It is estimated that if the Supreme Court jettisons that provision inside the Voting Rights Act to encourage states to create more majority-minority congressional districts, if the Supreme Court sunsets that provision of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, it is estimated by the New York Times that Republican-controlled states, especially in the South, will redraw their maps, purposely diluting Black and Hispanic neighborhoods so that white voters will have more clout in electing members of the House of Representatives. It will be left to the state Supreme Court. It will be left to the state Supreme Courts to decide whether or not it's legal. The New York Times estimates 12 reliably blue congressional seats in the South would immediately flip red. The clock is ticking. Deadlines are fast approaching for candidates to file for election or re-election for the House of Representatives. Now, this Supreme Court ruling that's about to come down about these two heavily Black congressional districts in Louisiana, the calendar is important here. If the Supreme Court drags its feet and doesn't issue a ruling until June of next year, then it will be too late to affect the 2026 midterms. But if the court moves swiftly and does sunset that provision inside the 1965 Voting Rights Act, then they've handed Republicans possibly permanent control of the House of Representatives. Maybe. Then you got, if the Supreme Court before January 1st, 2026 sunsets that provision, you're going to see New York, Illinois, California, Maryland start redrawing their maps to make up the deficit, and the 2026 midterms will devolve into a legal morass. The Supreme Court dragged its feet on last year's immunity ruling. We saw that. They made it impossible for Trump to go on trial before the November election. They did that on purpose. They waited until the very last day, I think it was July 1st, when they issued that immunity ruling. They waited for as long as possible because they basically said, we want the American people, not a jury, to decide whether or not Trump is guilty. Some say by waiting until July 1st to issue their immunity ruling last year, they handed the presidency to Donald Trump. If the court overturns or sunsets the provision inside the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the provision that encourages states, especially in the old Confederacy, to create majority-minority congressional districts, if the Supreme Court sunsets that before the end of this year, it'll be a bad look for the Roberts Court. It will look like they're going out of their way to hand the House of Representatives next year to Donald Trump and the Republican Party because, as I just said, the New York Times estimates that at least 12 reliably Democratic seats in the old Confederacy would be erased if that provision is sunsetted. Who knows? It's conceivable that these redistricting wars will get so vicious and so complicated. They are vicious right now, and they are complicated. We may have the Supreme Court deciding the outcome of the 2026 midterms, which is probably what Trump wants. After the federal court voided Texas's new map, California Governor Gavin Newsom immediately declared victory. He said, quote, Donald Trump and Greg Abbott played with fire and got burned. Democracy won. This ruling is a win for Texas and for every American who fights for free and fair elections, unquote. Okay, but they just passed Prop 50 in California. Now, I can't imagine California drawing 5 new blue seats, while Texas's new red seats are blocked by the courts. The whole purpose of Prop 50 in California was to cancel out Texas's 5 new red seats. So whether the Supreme Court of the United States wants to get into the gerrymandering morass or not, it's starting to look, then again, I don't know anything, but it's starting to look like all of these maps are going before the Roberts Court because of Trump. He's violating all norms. For example, despite heavy lobbying from J.D. Vance and Trump, the Republican-controlled Indiana State House, called back into session by Republican Governor Mike Braun for the express purposes of rewriting their congressional maps, not working. The Republicans in Indiana is a Republican-controlled state. So far, Republicans, or Trump, doesn't have votes in the Indiana State Senate to carve out 1 or 2 new Republican congressional seats. Indiana has 9 congressional districts. 2 are Democrat. Trump is demanding the maps get redrawn to dilute those 2 reliably blue districts, right? Trump and his White House have exerted tremendous pressure on the Indiana governor, who, Mike Braun, he's openly fearful of Trump, going so far as accusing his own Republican-controlled Senate on Monday of hiding in their offices, too cowardly to even take a vote on the new maps. It's estimated that as many as 10 Republican Indiana state senators are holding firm, refusing to vote in favor of rewriting the map. Trump and the Republican governor, Mike Braun, are threatening primary challenges to any Indiana Senate Republican who refuses to come out of hiding and vote for the new map. And you know it's more than just primary challenges. They're going to stand there. It looks like these 8 to 10 Republicans in the Indiana State Senate are going to stand their ground, especially since polling shows Indiana voters, despite being overwhelmingly red, they don't want their maps tampered with in order to tilt the playing field in Trump's favor. Some polls show 70% of Indiana voters want the map untouched. So I don't know if Indiana's Republican State Senate is going to continue to stand firm when it comes to standing up to Trump and Republican Governor Mike Braun insisting on new maps that create at least 1 new Republican seat. J.D. Vance has made several trips to Indiana, urging the state Senate to vote in favor of new maps. Trump lobbying hard. So far, Republicans, the 10 Republicans, 8 to 10 Republicans are standing firm. I don't know what's going to happen. The Epstein files, Trump's abysmal polling, the lowest of his presidency, not moving the needle in Trump's favor in Indiana. Now, Obama carried Indiana in 2008. It's since become reliably red, but it's also Mike Pence country. Mike Pence, the former vice president under Trump, Mike Pence's brother Greg, up until this year, served in the United States House of Representatives. Those two are beloved in Indiana, and they are openly defiant of Donald Trump and privately urge Indiana Republicans on the state level to resist Donald Trump. So watch Indiana's Republican Senate this week. See if they vote on a new map. Again, none of this is normal. There are laws, and then there's normality, decency, playing fair. In politics, with or without Trump, it's a game of inches. Every seat counts. Every seat in the House of Representatives counts. Have to flip 3. Every seat counts. One Republican state legislature that defies Trump, that refuses to create one new congressional seat, could ultimately serve as the deciding factor in Trump becoming a private citizen in 2029. That is what Trump understands. Politics on the micro level. He's gotten good at it. That's why last year he pressured Republicans who controlled Nebraska's legislative branch to switch their state to winner take all in the electoral college. Remember that? He fought for that one reliably blue electoral vote in Nebraska. Nebraska and Maine are the only 2 states that allocate electoral votes based on returns from individual congressional districts. So that means Maine, despite being reliably blue in presidential elections, usually casts one red electoral vote to reflect the rural part of the state. Nebraska, reliably red, thanks to the congressional district in and around Omaha, always casts one reliably blue electoral vote. Trump was fighting for just one electoral vote last year. He did everything he could, cajoling Nebraska Republicans, trying to get them to switch the state to winner take all, which would eliminate that one blue electoral vote. Maine then threatened to cancel that out by also switching to winner take all if Trump succeeded in Nebraska. He didn't succeed, but he expended plenty of energy trying. It's not normal. It's not normal to try to win this way, to disenfranchise voters. This is voter suppression. This is saying Democrats in Omaha, Nebraska, don't deserve to be represented in the Electoral College. It's not normal. Then you've got reliably red Florida, which seems predisposed, or at least the Republicans do, towards redrawing their maps, but so far that hasn't happened. Starting on December 4th, Republicans in the state legislature will meet to determine how they can eliminate seats currently held by Democrats Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Jared Moskowitz. Right now, 20 of the 28 House members from Florida are Republican. Governor Ron DeSantis says he thinks Republicans can carve out 2 more Republican seats. Meanwhile, reliably blue powerhouses, Illinois and New York, as well as Maryland, are planning to create several reliably blue congressional districts. And Illinois and New York are huge. They could theoretically add, at the very least, 2 Democratic seats each. So you see where this is heading. It doesn't stop. It's heading to the Supreme Court, unless the court stops it now. Then there's Utah, a reliably red state. Kamala Harris won close to 38% of Utah's vote in 2024. Pretty dismal. But that's the best a Democratic presidential candidate has done since LBJ's 1964 blowout against Barry Goldwater. Right now, Utah Democrats have 0 representation in Washington, D.C. Their 2 senators and all 4 of their House members are Republican. But that is probably changing. Right now, it's starting to look like a safe bet that Utah has created a new blue congressional district. A state judge just ordered Utah's congressional map to be redrawn, creating what appears to be a solidly blue congressional district in and around Salt Lake City. Her ruling obviously will be appealed before the state Supreme Court, but people I trust tell me the state Supreme Court will not overturn her decision, thanks to Proposition 4, passed in 2018, where Utah voters chose to put an end to gerrymandering, creating an independent bipartisan commission that prevents the state legislature from drawing maps favoring one party over another. Republicans now are trying to repeal Prop 4. Right now, Utah Republicans, including the governor, are complaining about this ruling handed down by the judge. They insist that judges don't draw maps, the legislative branch does. But Proposition 4, passed by voters in 2018, specifically granted Utah's judicial branch the last word on redistricting. Like I said, Republicans plan to appeal this judge's ruling, but the state Supreme Court will be hard-pressed finding legal precedent to overturn her ruling, because if all 4 of Utah's House seats are filled by Republicans, but Kamala Harris got 38% of Utah's vote in 2024, that means Utah is clearly in violation of Proposition 4, which forbids the state legislature from drawing maps to favor one party over another. 38% of Utah's residents are Democrats, yet they have zero representation in Congress. One could argue that is a violation of the 14th Amendment's equal protection under the law. And not that this matters, but it's literally taxation without representation. Literally. 38% of Utah's voters are Democrats. They have zero representation in Washington, D.C., but if they don't pay their taxes, they're going to jail. Ben McAdams is the Utah Democrat who briefly served in the House of Representatives for one term after getting elected in 2018. Democrat got elected from Utah in 2018. Then he voted to impeach Trump in 2019 and failed to win back his seat in 2020, despite Biden winning in 2020 and Democrats keeping the House in 2020 and winning control of the Senate. Now he's running for this newly created blue congressional district, which covers much of Salt Lake City, a Democratic stronghold. Kamala Harris carried Salt Lake County last year by nearly 54%. McAdams telling the Washington Post he'll be running against Trump. Trump is on the ballot next year. The midterms will be a referendum on Trump, the same way it was earlier this month, where we saw blowout wins for Democrats in Virginia, New Jersey, and California. McAdams says Trump's cuts to food stamps and allowing the Obamacare subsidies to expire are issues seared into the minds of voters. He also plans to run against Trump, grabbing immigrants off the streets and targeting blue cities by sending in the National Guard to fight non-existent crime. Make no mistake, if Democrats win back the House next year, the Trump White House will use all its power to overturn the election results, just like after losing the 2020 presidential election. Trump will seek remedy from the Supreme Court, not just claiming voter fraud, but calling into question the legitimacy of these newly created blue congressional districts. The problem is redistricting, gerrymandering is confusing. So who controls the narrative? Remember, this all started at the beginning of the year with Democrats only needing to flip 3 seats to win the House of Representatives next year. But Trump panicked, so Texas redrew their maps, creating 5 new red seats. California responded by passing Prop 50 on November 4th, which will redraw its maps to cancel out Texas. But now the courts are saying Texas's maps are unconstitutional, that they were drawn racially, so they're no good. Does California still create 5 new blue seats? Trump actively lobbied red states around the country to create all these new red seats. If he loses, if Republicans lose control of the House of Representatives next year, Trump will insist all those new red seats were legal, but all the new blue seats are unconstitutional. Don't believe me? Here is Trump's errand girl, Attorney General Pam Bondi, on Fox News this week, announcing she is already challenging Prop 50 in the courts. What is Pam Bondi's legal reasoning? Her old standby: racism. Racism against white people.
They're trying to create seats based on race, and they can't do it. And we're going to hold them accountable just like any other state. I mean, they've very publicly said, Sean, what they're trying to do, and it's illegal gerrymandering. They cannot do it. So, yeah, we sued them today. We're going to continue suing California until they start complying with the laws of our country.
Okay, I know this is confusing. I know it's difficult. This will be the issue of 2025 and 2026, gerrymandering. What you need to remember is if gerrymandering is done based on partisan lines, in other words, a Republican-controlled state house trying to create more Republican seats, the Supreme Court says that is perfectly constitutional. And you see this in Texas right now. The Republicans are saying, Greg Abbott said, this was purely partisan. We drew 5 new Republican congressional seats, so Republicans will keep the House of Representatives. They're being open about this because the Supreme Court says partisan gerrymandering is constitutional. If it's racial, if the maps are drawn to dilute majority-minority congressional districts, of which there are many in Texas, then it's unconstitutional according to the Supreme Court. So right now, you just heard Pam Bondi accusing California of redrawing maps based on race, because that's unconstitutional. She hasn't even seen the districts yet. Texas is insisting partisan. It's all partisan, has nothing to do with race. The problem is majority-minority congressional districts always vote for a Democrat. And you've got this Supreme Court ruling coming up about Louisiana's 2 reliably black congressional districts and the sunsetting, perhaps, of a provision in the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which encourages states, especially in the old Confederacy, encourages them to carve out congressional districts that give voice to people of color. If the Supreme Court sunsets that provision in the Voting Rights Act, then it is estimated that at least a dozen reliably blue Democratic congressional districts in the old Confederacy will be erased. I know it's hard to follow. It really is. But this is the issue going into 2026. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. Thank you for sticking with me on this, because I know it's dry, but this is it. This is the issue. Thank you to Bob and Mila in the chat room for keeping the conversation civil. I read all your comments. If I made any mistakes, let me know, please. Sometimes I misspeak. If you catch anything, let me know. And if I get my facts wrong, let me know. I issue corrections on this show. Please like this show. so I remain in your feed. The notification bells for some people aren't working. I think you need to go into your settings and approve political content. I think there's a little shadow banning going on with this show because it's political, so you may want to go through your settings, and I'll show you. I showed you how to do it once before. All right. Thank you. I think that covers everything. Thank you for listening to me. This was a great show, but it was hard. It's hard to explain this stuff. I think I did a pretty good job explaining the tension between the 14th Amendment and that provision in the Civil Rights Act of 1965. You may have to rewind and watch it again. Thank you.